All right. Finally, it's all working. Land descriptions. So when I say land descriptions, what does that mean to you?
Topography.
Topography. Okay. What else?
Adjectives.
Adjectives, like mountainous, valley, stream. Okay. What else about a land description? What else comes to mind? Okay, if I ask you, how do you know what you just bought? What do you say back to me? You just bought a piece of real estate. How do you know what you just bought?
I mean, descriptions with the land itself. I mean,
which would be
trees,
then the
rivers,
legal
water.
description or the boundary description or some way for the courts or whatever public records documentation we have, some way somebody has to be able to go back in and look at that and say, oh, this is what you bought. Now, most of us don't know how to read legal descriptions. The only person I've ever had, I had one person in one of my classes, he was a surveyor. And he knew exactly how to read legal descriptions. And I picked on him a whole lot in these classes because otherwise when you look at legal descriptions, they don't mean a whole lot to you. But a legal description is actually the phraseology that completes the plot of land that you bought. And it's got a starting and an ending point. It has to come to a close. It can be all kinds of shapes and sizes, but wherever it starts and however it meanders around, it's going to come to the point where it started and stop and close. So that would be the full legal description of what you bought. Now the legal description, if you're buying a condo and you're buying a unit that has elevations, it will also include degrees of elevation to tell you the difference between the second floor, the third floor, the fourth floor. They may be the exact same floor plate going all the way up, except you're on a different level. But otherwise, what we're seeing then is basically, this is what you just bought. And what we do in this area is we record our deeds. We record our legal descriptions, so they're available on the public record. And legal descriptions are a little bit different than some of the other things that we'll see is how people refer to real estate. Because we can refer to real estate different ways too. And that's what I'm going to get into here with the text tonight. So we're also going to talk about how land is physically described. We're going to talk about different ways to describe the location and the boundaries. We'll identify property located in the government survey. We're going to identify types of informal property description references, and we're going to understand how inconsistencies in property descriptions are resolved. Okay, you're not a surveyor, but when you go to a closing and when you buy a piece of property, the title agent or the closing agent, part of their job of doing this is they're going to make sure that that legal description is spot on. And they're also going to ask for the person that writes the legal description, usually it's an attorney or somebody, actually has their name on the document. So there's a way to go back and trace it and go back if there's something wrong with it. So surveying is just the mechanics of measuring and mapping land and its boundaries. And it's utilized to prepare navigational maps, establish land boundaries, and develop engineering data for construction. So, in the basis of surveying is how many of you play with GPS systems? Have a GPS in your car? How many of you go on Google Maps and research something on Google Maps? Okay, all of that to get us to where we are today, to be able to use our GPS and our Google Maps and everything, there's hundreds of years of surveying that has happened to get us here, to get us where we need to go. So the types that we have boundary, which is a survey used to identify the property's boundary lines, and then we can also have something called an as-built. It's a survey providing details of the location of the improvements located within the property boundaries. When you all go to close on residential real estate, you'll be dealing with boundary surveys. That's it. On commercial real estate, for the most part, you're dealing with boundary surveys. But you'll get an as-built survey when you say somebody, hey, I want to see what this house, how it sits on the land, or the dimensions of the house, or the buildings and its dimensions. I'm working in Frankfort, Kentucky right now because I want to dedicate the roads of the shopping center to the city of Frankfort and make them public roads. that's part of the whole development plan. Is when this shopping center was built, there's public roads that come into the shopping center. They go out and they go to other people's property. But we were the first developers, were the first to develop on this old farm site. And the plan was to dedicate these roads and make them public roads. Why do we want to do that? Because we don't want the expense of maintaining the roads. We don't want to have to pay for road repairs. I don't want to have to keep paying the snow removal on those public roads. But in order for me to complete the dedication of the, and go through this whole process with the City of Frankfort, I now have to pay surveyors to do as-built drawings for me. And when they come in and do as-built drawings for me, they're going to be doing the entire roadbed. They're doing the curbing. They're doing the sewage system next to it, the storm sewers. They're doing the sidewalks. They're doing everything around the streets so that when we give these streets to the City of Frankfort, they're going to have a good documentation of the as-builts. And guess what? These roads have been built for over 7 years and nobody ever did as-builts. But in order for us to complete this process of dedicating the land, we got to go through this process. I'm waiting for the quote of how many thousands of dollars it's going to cost to do as-built surveys. I imagine it'll be $25,000 to $50,000 to do them. But the roadways are very expensive to lay a section of road. Very expensive. So what we have to pay to have surveys done to create the as-built drawings is well worth this trade-off that we're going to go into. But it's never been done up to this point in time. Now, they did surveys and they created the roads and they had plans to create the roads, but nobody ever came back and did the as-built after to say this is what was done. When we do construction for tenant jobs or houses and we say we want to get a plan of this, you can go to the building department and get the permit plan, but those are not the same as the as-builts. The as-builts is all the tweaks, the changes, the little change orders, and the other things that they did to finish the building. So when our tenants build spaces, we actually have them give us an as-built drawing so we know exactly what's in our space. What are we getting? It's hard to get tenants to get to that final stage. Most of the time what they want to do is just give you the permit drawing and say, here, it's done. And we're going, no. We want to know all the changes, everything you made. So that they can do it simply by handwriting on plans or something like that as well. It works. But we want to know all the notes, all the changes. So that's the difference. Between the drawings that are there versus the as-built. What actually happened is what we're trying to get, the history. So we have land description systems. We have meets and bounds. It's a series of instructions describing the length and direction of the boundaries of the property. So meets refers to a distance, and bounds refers to the direction to follow from a starting point from the beginning. So it starts at a certain point and it goes degrees, this distance, this section, this direction. Then it points and then it changes direction. It may reference monuments to define either the point of beginning or corners of a parcel. We have things called natural monuments and we have artificial or man-made monuments. There's a street up in Warren County called Morro Casadale Road. And I know from years ago because it twists, turns, lots of turns. But my joke with my husband is when we first rode on Morro Casadale Road was, as I said, well, this just follows the farm fence lines. And that's exactly what it does. It follows the farm fence lines. But when those farms were established in the 1800s, it was fence lines. It was stones. It was the fence post. It was the tree. They were the natural and or man-made monuments that we used to describe that piece of property. And that was in the old meets and bounds. We actually used that. Some of those things don't exist anymore. That if the rock was big enough, it might still be there. But that fence post may be gone. That tree could have died. So what we find today is surveyors still go back, they try to find where that tree or that fence post was, but they'll put iron pins in the ground. And iron pins, after the grass grows, you don't see them very well, but they can still find them with metal detectors. So that's typically what they'll try to do, is some way of marking it. And today they're not as inclined to use these man-made monuments that can disappear. They typically are stuck with just direction and degrees to get you exactly where you have to go. So you're using a compass and surveying tools to be able to get to know what you're doing. We have public land survey system. It maps the United States into 6-mile square townships. And it uses principal meridian and baselines. And then it also had guide meridians and correction lines. So there's a little bit of math that you all are going to need to remember when you take your real estate tests. This is not actually do the math, it's math numbers that you need to remember. And we'll get into some of those numbers. And it's going to talk about these townships. So we have range lines and township lines. It's a 24-mile grid. It's broken down further by range and township lines into 6-mile squares created by the intersection of these range lines. Then the section is further divided into 36 sections, each township, and then each section is 1 square mile. So things you need to know for your test is something about a township is 640 acres, 36 sections. And somewhere in your real estate principles book, she's got one back there, and I want to see. Open your real estate principles book that I just loaned you, either the inside front cover of parcels of land. Each parcel of land is assigned a lot number. Now these aren't totally perfectly square blocks. They're just blocks as far as they're a shape. They call them blocks. They're assigned lot numbers. The plat map provides the size and boundaries of the lots along with the streets, easements, and any restrictive covenants that apply to subdivision. So you can go down to the Hamilton County Recorder's Office and you can pull these great big plat books that show subdivisions. And you can open up, if you live in a house in a subdivision, you can open up and you can actually find and see the plot of your land in these old historic maps. And they're still used. A lot of it's digitized today, but you can still go down in Hamilton County and research this. I spent a lot of time over in Boone County years ago when I worked for Duke Energy and was looking through their plat maps. Fun places, great history of stuff to see. We have informal references. Okay, so this is the other piece. When we negotiate a real estate contract, we don't have this whole legal description. We're not saying I'm going to buy such and such property that all these different. And typically a legal description on a small house is about a page. A larger piece of property can be many pages. But we come in and we say, I'm going to buy this street address in our area. In other areas of the country, they may buy tax parcels. It just depends upon how the real estate is done in that market. But in this market, we typically just go by street address. So when we're making our offer contract, in those contracts I passed out, all it's ever is doing is referencing a street address. When you lease an apartment or you lease an office space in a building, there's a street address associated with the building, but then it gives you a suite number. And that's a good enough legal description. The legal description that we're using. It's not the full legal description, but it's what we're using as a legal description for our reference purposes. It works. Everybody commonly knows what that is. We also have popular names, for example, the estate of Margaret Murray, or, okay, where I live, what today is Walmart used to be the old Ford transmission plant. It closed in 1976, but those of us that area still call it the old Ford transmission plant because Cincinnatians are terrible that way. We have landmarks and will continue to reference them for generations, even though it's changed uses. Okay, general descriptions. All land of Margaret Mary, wherever situated in the county of Blackacre. These general descriptions, these popular names, you'll see this when you go in the country, where we're not suburban areas, but you'll in old time country. I used to deal a lot down in McGoffin County, Kentucky. I had some trust property go down there, and that was the kind of description. That's what you'd see from people, referencing family names of what they owned. So it still goes on today. When we resolve disputes, if there's an ambiguity or mistake, it may be overcome if enough extrinsic evidence exists to clarify the ambiguity. So a court can cure the legal description's ambiguity by exercising its power of reformation. So the court will say, okay, we're going to do a reformation, we're giving you a new legal description. So the court remedies for boundary disputes are quiet title or declaratory judgments. Okay, so again, this chapter isn't real involved, but we're talking about we have this old time system to tell us